In this video, in the next couple, we're going to start to go over these rules of reducers, and we're going to eventually accumulate with a really interesting dive into some of the source code of Redux, and you're going to really get a behind-the-scenes look at how reducers really work. All right, so let's start off with rule number 1 up here. So the first rule of a reducer is that it must return any value besides undefined. So you might have noticed that when we put together that dummy reducer, or the replace me one, inside that index.js file, we had returned some fixed number or fixed string. The reason for that was that if we ever return undefined from a reducer, we're going to very quickly see an error message. So to demonstrate that very quickly, I'm going to flip back over to my post reducer, and I'm going to remove that return statement entirely. So now, anytime that this function right here gets called, it's going to return a value of undefined. That is not a Redux rule or a React rule. That is how JavaScript functions work. If you do not have an actual return statement with some value to the right of that, like a number or a string or an array, if you don't have any of that, then the function is going to return the value undefined by default when it gets called. So I'm going to empty out the function, and I'll save it. Then we can flip back over to our application, and we'll very quickly see a nasty error message that says post returned undefined during initialization. So again, we are not allowed to return undefined. That means that every single time that your reducer gets called, it should always have a return statement at some point in time, and that return statement should always return some type of value. So we can return a number. Let's try this out really quickly. I'll save this, and when I flip back over, my app will refresh, and the error message goes away. I can return a string. I can save that and flip back over. We'll see that the application still works. We can return a empty array. No problem here. We can do an object. No problem here. We can even do the value null. So when I save that and flip back over, no problem there as well. It's when I fail to place a return statement or I specifically return a value of undefined that we're going to run into that error message. Now, if you look at this error message very closely, it says returned undefined during initialization. So when Redux first boots up, it's going to run each of your reducers one time, and we'll dive into that process a little bit more closely in just a moment. But essentially, when Redux first boots up, it's going to call your reducers one time. And so right here, this during initialization word right there, that means that the first time your reducer was ran, it returned the value undefined. Now, the rule around not returning undefined is not only about initialization. Your reducer can never, ever return undefined, whether it is at initialization or at some point in time in the future when an action has been dispatched. Okay, so that's rule number 1 around reducers. We must always return any value besides undefined. So let's take a quick pause right here. When we come back to the next section, we're going to move on to our next big rule around reducers.